The Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, Wild Card Weekend DraftKings picks and preview. Remember, the lock for the main slate is going to happen at around 4:30, I think it is, 4-ish, 4:30-ish on Saturday. So you have a limited amount of time to not only set your lines, but get in the Pat Mayo Experience DraftKings Open Listeners League that is open for this week. There's only 1,000 spots, so those will fill up rather quickly. If you're looking for the link, it is in the description of this podcast and video. $15 to play, 3 max entry, no rake. So it's the best tournament on DraftKings. You may want to get into that. If you want some DK bucks, you got 2 ways to do so. 1, smash the like button for the video. Leave your DraftKings handle in the comment section. And you tell me which player on this DraftKings slate, high price player, let's say, must-play player that you're going to fade. Because, hey, you can't just play everyone. So what big name are you going to fade on Wild Card Weekend in your DraftKings lineup? And if you want to get into a draw for 100 DraftKings dollars, leave an audio review for the Pat Mayo Experience podcast. Subscribe to the show, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it might be. Spotify, leave a 5-star review, DraftKings handle, and something you like about this show, and you'll be in the draw for 100 DraftKings dollars. Winners announced on Monday's golf show with Jeff Feinberg, so you might want to tune into that, even if you don't like golf, to see if you won the 100 or 20 DraftKings dollars. I highly recommend you tune into the golf shows, by the way. We're going to be back in full swing. There's a GUP. If you go to gupscorner.com, there is a one-and-done contest, which means you get to take one golfer per week, and you can only take them once per year. I think it's like $50 or $75 to play, but it's a great ROI for your buck for entertainment. It's a lot of fun. You don't really need to know anything about golf. Highly recommend that everyone go play in that. You can check out the golf shows from earlier this week or even my Twitter. The links are all up there. And the best tool that you can have for that is fantasynational.com. If you're even just scraping the surface about playing DraftKings golf, any daily fantasy golf, betting on golf, fantasynational.com is where you want to be at. Additionally, okay, so I'm trying to figure out a way to explain this. There's an account on Instagram. Cool dude. He's at The Fantasy Football Show. Recommend everyone go follow him. He's trying to launch this league that's going to be a slow draft, which commences right after the Super Bowl or right before the Super Bowl. Can't really remember. But I believe it's 96 teams. And there's going to be a draft. I'm not entirely sure all the details on how it works, but if this is something that interests you out there, he has offered up 2 spots to viewers and listeners of this show to go into it. So at The Fantasy Football Show on Instagram, if you just hit him up with a DM or put something in his message, his comment on one of his posts, and just say you're a viewer of the PME and you want one of these spots, then hey, go for it. It sounds like a pretty cool league. I don't have the time to plan it myself, so we offered up to the viewers who might want to partake in just a really off-kiltered league. You can go find the rules, ask them what the rules are, and see if it interests you, but I highly recommend you go do it. It could be cool if you're just looking for a different format to play fantasy football. All right, enough of that shit. Let's get into it. Jake Ciely from theathletic.com is on the line. How is your new year going, pal?
It's going very well so far, buddy. Though, by the way, it's 4:35 is the kickoff on Saturday for you. But I gotta tell you, it's weird as you kicked off the show and I was waiting for "Welcome to Week," whatever. When you said the playoffs, it just sounds weird now.
Well, usually, me and you finish up our part of the show. We do periodic shows as we go throughout the year, but Week 16 is generally the last week we talk. But I was like, hey, we're doing DraftKings picks. We're still talking football. I gotta talk to Ciely. Hey, you're not going to win Guest of the Year, by the way.
Oh, I know that. It's coming down to, what is it? Cust is, I checked, last time I checked, he was 2 or 3 percentage points behind. Maybe he can make a late run at it.
Yeah, so I'll put that in the description of the podcast or video. I have a thing up on Twitter right now. I believe it runs through Tuesday. The PME Awards for 2019. So it has, favorite guest and then all the subcategories of guest, favorite topic, favorite show, that kind of thing. Everyone should go vote in them, but it is coming down to the main 4, the guests who appeared the most times on the show were you, Paul Shag, who's generally behind the camera, but also hosts the UFC show, Feinberg and Cust. And it's really coming down to Feinberg v. Cust for Guest of the Year. Then there's other ones. I kind of feel bad because, people like them because they're in studio or they're on all the time. That I probably should have dropped you down into Best Video Guest category.
So I had a shot to win, but hey, look, I don't know because I'm not seeing the responses for the people who don't say it, but I think I'm in the running for the write-in one, right? Though.
Yeah, that's coming in. There's a write-in award for most accurate and best picks guest. It's a write-in, so you can write into who you think is going to be that person. I believe it's between like you, Rick, and Raza. Like, you guys are the three runaways right now. I don't know who's who.
Oh, well, maybe I have a shot at that. Give me some more write-in awards. That's my only chance of winning anything. You could have put me up against that. Actually, what was the one time that somebody beat like me, Gary, and somebody else? It was like they got like 70% of the vote, and then Gary and I and whoever the third person were, we get like 5% each.
I think that was the first year we did this, like 3 or 4 years ago. I think Feinberg was just a runaway.
Yeah. So basically, I guess you can put him in the Hall of Fame after this one, maybe. And so Feinberg's, is it like you can call it the Feinberg Award?
We could call it the Feinberg Award. I mean, he's on like 100 shows a year, so I mean, it's been well earned for him.
And the problem is like when you go up against him and Cust, you have the entertainment factor that nobody else, myself included, doesn't have. I mean, those two, I mean, I putting them two on the show together when you do is just, that's a treat in its own right.
It's funny because when we first started doing the show, that's not how we did it. It'd be me, Garion, and Cust, and it would just be Jeff and I, and then we just mangled it around at some point, and we ended up on this. I think it worked out for the best, although I do miss my me, Cust, and Garion shows. Different vibe, but pretty hilarious.
It definitely, I would say so, but in a whole different, it's kind of like a different hilarity.
Yeah. So the link to the voting and all of the awards is in the description of this video and podcast right now. So you can go vote in the PME Awards if you would like to do that. Any thoughts on this slate before we jump into each position? Like, is there any one team in particular that you're like, you got to have all those guys? And if that's true, is the answer the Saints?
I think so that would be my answer, but I know we're going to break it down. I'm hesitant to go too heavy on it only because what it comes down to, and we'll talk about it, I actually have two different lineups with some Saints, is I kind of feel like it's either going to be naked Drew Brees or Drew Brees and a bunch of people. Like, I just kind of feel like this is the Saints. It could go either way. It could have been a bunch of Kamara. Look, let's go back to last week and the fact that Michael Thomas, nada. What was it, like 50, 60 yards, didn't even score a touchdown? It was Alvin Kamara, other options, Taysom freaking Hill. So, maybe Taysom Hill's the play, but I feel like the Saints are going to be a factor one way or another.
Okay. So let's get into running backs. The highest priced running back on this slate is Derrick Henry at New England. He's $8,200. After that, it's Dalvin Cook at $78, Alvin Kamara at $7,400. Then there's a huge drop to Miles Sanders and Devin Singletary at $62,000 and $6,000. Boston Scott right behind him at $5,800. James White, Travis O'Mail, Marshawn Lynch, and then Carlos Hyde and Latavius Murray, $51,000 and $5,000. On a slate that only has 8 teams on it, picking and choosing, like, you could pay up for Michael Thomas and Derrick Henry if you really wanted to. Do you think Derrick Henry is in an absolute smash spot at New England? Because I know that when most people construct their lineups, basically, Derrick Henry's going to get the ball over and over and over unless it's a Deion Lewis revenge situation against the Patriots here. And he has been banged up with that hamstring injury, so maybe you fade him and all of a sudden he tweaks it in the first quarter and he can't play anymore. It's a highly unlikely scenario, but it's in the range of outcomes. The issue is you can pay up, you'll have the salary cap to pay up for all these guys and basically whoever you want. It's just there's no value at running back. Like, who's the pay down guy that you almost do have to pay up, don't you?
I think you do have to. There's 2 guys I am looking to pay down if you want, but this is something we did the fantasy show, the DraftKings show specifically, mostly with Joe Holka over for the footballers. And Joe is a big proponent of always saying, just go pay up at running back. People's try to get too cute all the time. And that's where you run into trouble. Like, so many weeks that people were trying to make excuses to not pay up for Christian McCaffrey. And Christian McCaffrey got to, as you know, 11-5 at one point, and he was still worth it most of the time because even his bad games was 20 points. Running back, when you do have this and you do have the kind of separation you do have to pay up. I'm not paying up for him only because I'm trying to construct a roster that I actually did one that I really like. And both the rosters I like, I went to Kamara, which I'm sure we'll talk about that. But just because of that savings, I was able to manipulate a little bit more of what I liked. But I did find rosters that I like with Henry. I just like the Kamara ones a little bit more. But to your point, I think you need to have at least one of them. If you could find a way to get 2, and if you notice, I'm not saying Dalvin Cook because I don't want to trust Dalvin Cook coming off an injury, coming against the Saints defense that generally don't run very well between the tackles against. I think it's Kamara and Henry for me. And if you're going to pay down, there are 2. Do you want me to just tell you the 2 that I'm looking at?
Well, I mean, I'm looking at my lineup right now, and I actually went to Dalvin Cook. He's not my preferred option. He'd probably like if we were doing our weekly rankings, he'd be behind the other two. But I know that people aren't going to use him because of the risky situation, because of the injury, and on such a short slate, I need to figure out a way to differentiate my team just a little bit. And I do think that he probably still has the highest upside of any of those three guys because if he's healthy, he's going to be on the field, he's going to get all the goal line work, and he's going to be involved in the receiving game. And with Derrick Henry, I mean, Derrick Henry could score 5 touchdowns and absolutely break the slate. We saw Kamara in week 17 almost do exactly the same thing. But if Cook is healthy, they're going to need him. And I do think this game could end up being relatively competitive. Everyone's just kind of writing off the Vikings. And there's a situation where the pass rush is so good for the Saints that it just might be a lot of dump off city. And if Cook is healthy, that's going to be a lot of him. Not so much Kyle Rudolph, not so much Irv Smith. If Dalvin Cook's healthy, he's going to be the one getting the ball. So I'll risk my lineup on that. And then when I pay down, I just use Duke Johnson.
Yeah, so I definitely like that. And I like Dalvin Cook in tournaments. If you're doing cash or small field.
You know what? We don't even talk about cash on this show, Jake.
Okay.
I don't want to win double my money. You know what? I want to win $1 million.
That's certainly fair. And then so that's how we're speaking about everything today. Then I got to tell you, then the Kamara to Cook, for the fact that their price is as close as it is, I'd rather just go with Cook because, as you mentioned, you're going to get the lower ownership. You're going to get $400 difference with the same ceiling. Honestly, and to be honest, how different is their floor? Because until the past 2 weeks of Kamara, I mean, the floor was just as bad. He had one game before the past 2 weeks where he scored a touchdown. There was 2 touchdowns in that same game. But what was that, week 3 or 4? It was super early in the season. So the floor is there because Drew Brees could go to everybody else. So for your point, if we're going to specifically talk tournaments, I do like Dalvin Cook more for everything you just said.
So I guess the big thing to try to figure out with this slate is the Eagles' backfield, because I do think that you can take advantage of Seattle on the ground, and they're a team that's just going to kind of, I mean, Seattle's defense isn't very good. Like, regardless if it's the passing game or the running game, you can get some yardage on them. Let's just say that. But Miles Sanders, as we record this, did not practice on Thursday. So is he going to play?
Question mark? I'm Ron Burgundy? That's really what's going to cut to. I don't know if he does. For the same conversation we're kind of having about Cook, I think that if he does play, you're looking at a good pivot off Boston Scott, because after, like, you know how it is, especially in DFS, recency bias is king, and people are going to be all over Boston Scott. You and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago when he was first relevant on your ranking show, and I told you what he was. He was Darren Sproles, and this is exactly what we're seeing. He's the Darren Sproles role in this offense, so just give him the name Darren Sproles, and that's how you understand Boston Scott. But because of that, everybody's going to be all over him. Now, obviously we're not talking about if Miles Sanders is out, but if he's in, they're actually very close in price, another $400 difference, because Boston Scott's now priced up. I think that you either take Miles Sanders for your Dalvin Cook argument, because nobody's going to want to use him coming on that injury and worried that he might only see 5 touches. He might be a decoy, whatever it might be. So I think that's a good play for there. Duke Johnson wasn't even the one that I was looking at. The one I was paying down for is I'm all over James White. Tons of James White.
How come James White?
Because I'm looking at James White in this situation against this defense, for me, in my opinion, sets up more as a James White game, getting involved in the passing game, getting involved against a team that, yes, the matchup's not great, and we assume that everything should be shut down, as you said, and they just run. There's a scenario where this game gets slowed down with Derrick Henry, as you mentioned, with the whole situation and, AJ Brown, and all of a sudden, oh God, dude, well, there's nothing going on there. So they run 40 plays. There's also one where Tannehill, as he has done in the past, does well against this team. And I know it wasn't Stephon Gilmore, the defense they have right now, but that they keep pace. Similar to your point about the Vikings is, hey, I think that the Tennessee Titans are going to put up more points, have a little bit more pace than what people are expecting, similar to what you're saying. I think everybody's writing off the Vikings. Everybody's writing off the Titans going into New England. I think if you keep this pace up and you get this game to the 20s on both sides, I think James White is going to be a factor, and they're not just going to lean on Sony Michel, because as you've seen, leaning on Sony Michel is just, it's a minus EV as a team.
Yeah, it's not a great situation to be in, but he's almost like how we used to treat Derrick Henry before Derrick Henry flipped the switch in the final 4 weeks last year, and has just been a monster ever since. That Michel is the only, he's not the only guy on the team. I shouldn't say that, because James White could have 3 touches for 3 touchdowns. But if you're trying to talk about a guy who could score 3 touchdowns on 7 carries and gain 2 yards, it's Sony Michel in this game.
Yeah, see, I'm looking at, though, too, the cost for the return. is you get down to this 5,700 where a lot of people, like I said, are going to be on Boston Scott. You drop an extra $100, you get to 57. And there's a lot of games where at 57, you're getting almost 3 times value. Several games. Like, granted, his ceiling's not 25, but you don't need to, in a slate like this, you don't need to hit 25 at every position. If you save and he does hit his 15, 16, 17 points at 5,700, what you save to get maybe Michael Thomas and Derrick Henry or Michael Thomas and Dalvin Cook, something like that, will be the game changer.
Okay. So right now I'm looking at the beat reporters still expect Sanders to play on Sunday when Philadelphia hosts Seattle in its playoff opener. So first of all, good call on Miles Sanders this year. If we kind of scale back to the very beginning of the season, maybe we should do our best hits and biggest misses at some point. I mean, that's a good filler show for during Pro Bowl week or whatever it is. But you kind of made the case, and we even said it on the ranking show a few times, especially the trade deadline shows, like this is a guy that you want to trade for in the second half of the season. That's sort of what you said at the very beginning. It's like it's going to take a while for Sanders to get himself established. And obviously it ended up taking the Jordan Howard injury to really unleash him, but he would make a great second half player, but you're going to have to ride through and bench him for most of the first part of the season. So that's always intriguing. So let's say we went through if he does play and he's limited, does that make him a good player or not? How does Jordan Howard factor into any of this, if he does at all? He returned in week 17 and he played 1 snap. Now, obviously that's not great by any means. However, it was encouraging to A, see him active, and B, actually have him on the field for even 1 snap, because he had been non-contact for a month before that maybe once they got up in that game, they're like, hey, why don't we just kind of save Jordan Howard here? Is there any chance that you would use Jordan Howard in the lineup this week? Because I'm thinking about it.
So this is tough. This is, now you're talking about a conversation where we start pulling in our hatred for Jared Cook type of thing. Like, I have such a hatred and a bias against Jordan Howard that it's always going to be tough for me to get it pulled in, similar to like my hatred for Will Fuller and stuff like that. And it's not Jordan Howard's been productive. It's not like the Will Fuller where he's only got 2 good games. My problem with Jordan Howard is that it kind of comes from my scouting area of things, where it's like Jordan Howard does what any running back in the NFL should be able to do. He just does what he can get, and what he can get. If he doesn't get, he does. So what it comes down to is, yes, I can see a scenario with no Miles Sanders where Jordan Howard is a value play. Now, my problem is I don't want to put him in my lineup because it's the Sony Michel factor. That's what you're going to need. You're going to need, it's going to be 20 carries for 80 yards, 75 yards, kind of unspectacular, but falling into 2 or 3 rushing touchdowns because that's what this offense turns to in the end zone. My second pullback from that is looking at the last 4 games of the season, what Carson Wentz has been doing with relatively nobody. He's been playing great at the quarterback position. What the Carson Wentz we've always wanted to see. Do they go away from that because it's been working? Because when Jordan Howard was Jordan Howard, the Eagles were kind of like, they like Carson Wentz was struggling at times. And I know it's a completely different team makeup now, but I mean, do you kind of pull off Carson Wentz just to get Jordan Howard involved? And that's why I have a little bit of hesitancy there.
So yeah, I like the comparison you made. He's almost like, and the reason I would want to go to him is that if I was considering using Sony Michel, that Jordan Howard's going to be the lower owned Sony Michel, more risk, but similar upside. And realistically, the floor is the same, because if Sony Michel doesn't score a touchdown, he's probably not doing anything.
No, he's probably, and that's the biggest thing is I think if I was forced to go between the two, I'm looking at the price. I would like to say, all things considered, I'd go with Sony Michel. But I could see Jordan Howard being interesting. Like, I don't think he'll be very, very highly owned. He could be the sleigh breaker of all of them, especially if he scores twice.
I guess the other big situation that you're going to have to deal with right now is when you drop to the bottom of the $5,000 range, you have Homer and you have Marshawn Lynch. And if we take a look at the snap share distribution between the two in week 17, I thought it was somewhat interesting, only because Homer played 67% of the snaps and Lynch played 31. Now we get into a situation where, is that because Marshawn Lynch was just signed off the street? Is it because they got behind in that game? Like, if we look at the receiving game, Homer had 5 catches, Marshawn Lynch had none, although Lynch outcarried Homer 12-10 in that contest. They're 2-point favorite. They're now 1.5-point favorites on the road in Philadelphia against a run defense. It's like, all right, it's slightly above average, but it's certainly susceptible. They should be able to do something on the ground. We know that the Seahawks want to run the ball. Do you have a preferred play between these two, or is it just leave both them alone? Because I think there's one of them could be incredibly valuable here. And for me, it's probably going to be Homer, because he actually does stuff out of the backfield.
So, and that's the thing. And also in the passing game, you're not going to see a ton from Lynch. And you do, granted, this is a run heavy team and it wants to establish the run. But if you beat the Eagles this year, you beat them in the past easily. Like they make everybody look good. So the opportunity here where I think a lot of people, you're going to see a lot of stacks with Russell Wilson, Tyler Lockett, and DK Metcalf. And I think that's going to be a very common one out there. And I can see why. If the Eagles just get abused in the passing game, that's a stack that you have to pay a little bit of a premium for. So people are going to be thinking, hey, you know what? That's going to be one that's maybe less owned. I actually think it ends up being a higher owned stack of everything. And maybe your pivot is this, and it's Homer in the passing game. I'm not extremely excited for either one of them. And, to pimp the D'Angelo Williams show that I do with him, he has a really interesting theory on this whole Marshawn Lynch thing, going back to even the Super Bowl and going back to what happened last week where, the whole snafu with the delay of game. And he was initially on the field for that 1 yard potential carry and then the delay. He says that I'm just telling you, he says Pete Carroll doesn't want Marshawn Lynch to be the hero because they don't want that with what happens with him in the media. And they don't want him to be the face of the team. You see the fans, they went nuts for his first carry. He says he thinks Pete Carroll and his team don't want that, which makes me think like, oh my God, is he even going to get a carry inside the 5 or is he just always going to find reasons not to use him?
Yeah, but that is like next level conspiracy thinking.
Isn't it like that's the super narrative that you've ever heard of?
I like that it's coming from an ex-player too, because it's funny to think that like players would think about this. Like obviously, there's probably some sort of situation that happened to him at some point. Like maybe when like Le'Veon Bell went down and then he took over and was great. They're like, we got to put D'Angelo back on the bench. Can't take too much heat away from Le'Veon.
No, he does have a little bit of a similar story of like, so when he left the Panthers, not on good terms, you can go listen to his whole story. Mike Tomlin told him, he's like, before they played them, they were playing them, I think in the preseason. I think that's what he said. Anyway, Mike Tomlin came to him and said, I'm making you team captain. He's like, don't do it to me. I'm going to walk away as soon as they do like he's like, I'm making you team captain. And then they had the game and they made team captain and he shook his hands and he got back to the sideline and Mike Tomlin said, see, I knew you would do the right thing. So, and maybe that's what it is. Maybe like there's these conspiracies when it comes to head coaches that like these players believe.
It's interesting. One guy we did not talk about whatsoever, Devin Singletary against the Texans.
I have him
in. You have him in. Okay, so I guess because he's $6,000. We just kind of talked around a lot of these guys. Can you see a scenario where you pass on the big 3 running backs, Henry and Cook and Kamara, and start your team with, let's say Sanders is active, start it with Sanders and go Singletary, or go Singletary and Travis Homer, or however way you want to piece these guys together. I think that way you can make your team completely different than everyone else's for starters, and then it allows you the ability to pay up at tight end, to pay up at every other position, because you've saved so much money off the top. Do you think that's a viable strategy, or is it stupid not to take one of the studs?
So I think it's viable, but it's still kind of stupid if it can be both, because I think it's only viable in the 5%, 10% chance that actually works. So if you're setting 20 lineups, if you're going for a max entry 25 lineup somewhere, maybe you do that 1 or 2. I'm not doing it if I'm only throwing in 5 entries. I probably even at 10 entries might not think about doing it, but I think that's why, is because go back to what I brought up before with the whole Joe Holcomb thing, is you pay up for those kind of running backs because not doing it doesn't work 90% of the time. So there is a scenario, but now you're doubling down. It's not only the fact that you don't want to pay up for Derrick Henry, you're not paying up for 2 of them. You're taking that completely off the table. So that's why I said you just do the math there, and you're asking 2 guys to hit near a 20-point performance. And yeah, it can work because you can get the studs at wide receiver and tight end, but it's always been proven to be more smart, more return on value to do the running backs than to go to the wide receivers and savings.
Yes, but one of the big points about paying up at running back is you're paying up for that guaranteed volume. And the one thing with Singletary is that he's actually closer to the studs in terms of volume than the guys who are like very close and below him in terms of DraftKings pricing this week. His only drawback is that Josh Allen steals all of his touchdowns.
He does, and you're also looking at, so Houston, they're not the defense. And that's why they're not even comparable. So I'm just saying that. But the last 2 weeks of the season, the volume was there, and the dude didn't even break double digits.
True. So with Houston, so they were a top 10 run defense for most of the season. As the final 6 weeks hit, they now finished the season 22nd in run DVOA. They're 26. Like, they have a really bad defense. Now, do you think J.J. Watt plays and or affects this whatsoever?
all the reports are that he is playing. I don't think his first game back is going to change that defense that dramatically. We're talking about, I will talk about when we get to wide receiver, but I don't think it's going to be that kind of an impact where, oh my God, they rebound to where they are. Because to your point of where they were to fall to where they are now, they have to be even worse than they are now. But like math, you have to be even worse than that. So they were one of the most favorable matchups, like the Jaguars, like the Panthers. They were down there. So that's part of the reason why I do have Singletary and quite a few. I'd say I'm looking right now, I'd say 30-40%. I do like Singletary for every reason you just said. It's the volume. It's a much better matchup. And even with J.J. Watt, I don't think we all of a sudden jump back to top 10. I think maybe at worst case, it's a middle of the pack kind of matchup, and then you would still take the volume anyway.
Of the cheaper ones, I mentioned Duke Johnson. You said James White. James White's still James White's still $5,700. So let's say you want to go scumming here to try to fit someone in. Like I said, I like Duke Johnson the best. Can you see a scenario where Dion Lewis does anything here, or Rex Burkhead, one of those guys?
No, I was gonna say if I'm going scumming it, I hate to do it because you're just relying on the touchdowns. But it's Sonny Michel. I mean, that's for that price at 4,600. Falls into 2 touchdowns as the Patriots will do. That's where I would go. Rex Burkhead can. It's kind of like for Will Fuller. All right, it's going to be 2 times out of 16 games. Hopefully that happens for you.
So the big thing with me and Duke Johnson is if you do play him, you probably want to create a script in your lineup where it's a Duke Johnson type game. Like if you do like Josh Allen and John Brown, that kind of thing, or in Cole Beasley, let's say.
Right.
That's your Bills stack. You might want to bring it back. I mean, you probably want to bring it back with a like DeAndre Hopkins, but Duke Johnson is a cog in that passing game as well if they're playing catch up, where you would probably want that for the savings at running back.
So that's, I'm glad you brought that up too. That's something else Joe Hokel talks a lot about, is what you just said about understanding that if you're putting somebody in like a Sonny Michel, like obviously if you're putting in Sonny Michel, and I don't think a lot of people would be starting him anyway, but you don't put in Sonny Michel probably with Derrick Henry because you're creating a scenario, as you just said, where the Patriots are up. They're running the ball a ton. And if that's the case, well, now you're forcing the Titans, as much as they would love to run the ball with Derrick Henry, to pass more. It's a lot of people miss that when you're building these kind of lineups. If you're going to go scum it, as you said, with these kind of running backs, you have to create a scenario that works on both sides. You don't want to create a scenario where it's like, oh, I hit that, but now I lost all the value I potentially had because I didn't make up for it with the quarterbacks and wide receivers that should off play it.
Let's switch to wide receivers. The most expensive receiver, no shocker, most expensive player on the slate is Michael Thomas at $9,300. My quick take on this, he has the best matchup, basically, of anyone on this slate. He's the best receiver in football. And yeah, whatever, he's coming down from a down week. But somehow, on a slate with 8 games, Michael Thomas is priced right around where he normally is. Like, I can't envision a scenario where I make a lineup that doesn't have Michael Thomas in it. He's not the big name that I'm going to be fading this week.
No, he's not. But I do have a couple, but that's mostly, and we'll talk about it if we get to it. But I actually have one where I have Hopkins instead of Michael Thomas, and that's just to differentiate a little bit there. But I'm looking at the fact, look, somebody tweeted this out earlier today, and I don't remember who it was. So if anybody sees the tweet, credit to them. It was something about the fact that it's like 75 something percent completion or percentage going from Breeze to Thomas. And then the fact is that Xavier Rhodes and that whole secondary is allowing like a 76% completion percentage. So Michael Thomas not having double digit receptions is like unheard of, obviously. To put it, I say all that to put it in this perspective, as you just said. And we're talking about Michael Thomas as almost a guarantee, and I put that in quotes because nothing ever is. But you're talking about a guarantee of near or above double-digit receptions. You find a way to fit him in at $9,300.
Yes, and there's enough players that no one's going to have like the perfect lineup on paper looking at it, that it's worth having him in, even if you have to drop down at tight end and something like that, or take a cheap receiver, a gamble on someone like that. It was Sal Vetri who put that out, by the way. It was Jeff Radcliffe had one, then Sal Vetri had another, kind of compounding both those as it pertained to DFS. So, both friends of the show, check them out. So the overall scope of receivers here, $9,300, Michael Thomas. After that, we drop into DeAndre Hopkins at $77. He'll probably draw Tre'Davious White in this game, although it probably doesn't matter with him. AJ Brown.
No, that's why I like it. I think that. Sorry, go ahead.
AJ Brown against Stephen Gilmore, $7,400. Then Lockett against that Eagles secondary, $7,200. Diggs, Edelman, Thielen, DK Metcalf, John Brown, and then Cole Beasley. That's a $6,000 range. Cole Beasley comes in at $5,900. So those two guys that we talked about, you were just about to interject, Hopkins against Tre'Davious White, and then A.J. Brown against Stephen Gilmore, at least presumably, are the matchups that we're expecting there. This is why you like them this week, because you think people are going to avoid them, because I have so far in my lineups.
Yeah, I do. I'm sorry. I'm laughing still. I'm still laughing because all I'm picturing is that one show that you had. You're like, would you fucking let me finish? I don't remember who that was, and that's the first time I've ever dropped that word on your show. But I had to do it because that's all that's going through my mind is that the guy kept interrupting you, and it was the best thing ever. Anyway, so I do like Hopkins more than Brown. I think that Stephon Gilmore is actually what just happened with last week with Devontae Parker. Talk about recency bias. I think that's why, and I don't know, I'll check FanShare and everything like that. But I don't know if that AJ Brown's ownership might be higher than Hopkins because of the price and because people are going to be like, oh, well, he's not as good as we think he is. And I still think that Stephon Gilmore is as good as White, if not better. So in any case, you said it as you were going down the list. You said not that matters with Hopkins. Hopkins is going to be force-fed the ball probably as many times as Michael Thomas, whether or not Will Fuller is healthy. And I think that Will Fuller actually being in that game might even pull more people away from Hopkins. So I like Hopkins as the pivot off of Thomas for the savings and for the big name against a bad matchup that could still put up a Michael Thomas-like game.
So for me, the one thing, and just trying to break this down from a film perspective, looking at the body type of Devontae Parker and the success that he had against Stephen Gilmore, he was able to really bully him more than I would have expected. And a lot during the course of the season, Gilmore is playing against receivers that are marginally larger than him, or he's the exact same size. But A.J. Brown is going to be bigger than him. He can be a physical presence against Stephen Gilmore. And I think a lot of people are going to back off of it because of that. Like, people, weirdly enough, still love the Patriots in this game. That I could actually see. The main thing that I could see with Brown being more owned than Hopkins is just Hopkins is more expensive. And if you want to, because everyone wants to play Michael Thomas, so playing Thomas and Hopkins gets a bit pricey, that if you do have the savings down to Brown, I think people might take it, but I do think he can have a lot of success in this matchup.
I agree with you. I said the only reason between splitting hairs between the two of them would be that's why I would go Hopkins. But I could see a scenario too, and you got me intrigued. I initially started down that path, but I forget what happened. I do want to now, I'll probably do it after the show, build a lineup with Hopkins and A.J. Brown and see what I could do there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. If you just fade Michael Thomas, like if you're playing 1, 2, or 3 lineups, you don't want to fade Michael Thomas. If you start verging it at 10 or 20, then yes, of course, you're probably not going to play 100%. You play like 80%, and you're still well leveraged against the field. Although he probably, even in tournaments, I'm guessing he comes in at like 70% ownership.
I wouldn't be surprised. But also to your point, that's the big thing too, is if you're fading off Michael Thomas, you're going to also be fading away from what people have paired with Michael Thomas a lot too, because it'll be the $5,000 and $6,000 guys where you get two $7,000 and now you're in a whole different, I mean, you've already distanced yourself from the pack.
Well, one strategy tip that you can try to employ, but it's obviously no guarantee kind of thing, but if I've had success with it on Thanksgiving slates and these sorts of slates in the past, is if you stack the first game, let's say, and you take some of the smaller pieces from the Bills and Texans game, where that is the first game out of the gate, and let's say your guys hit, let's say you use, I don't know, Isaiah McKenzie on the Bills, or Robert Foster, like a cheap piece, or a Dawson Knox, doesn't matter who it is, like the sleeper piece of the game, and it hits, Kenny Stills, whatever it might be, and that hits. You can then late swap and reconstruct your lineups to go on to the chalkier plays, because you already have a head start against the field, who now needs to catch up by using one of the cheaper plays from some of the other games. I think that's a viable strategy for some of your lineups.
I do too. And especially because a lot of people think of it the other way as well, is they're kind of like, well, if I take Hopkins and Deshaun Watson, I'm sitting with this nice lead and then all, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's kind of, you go that route. Again, this isn't, I would say I want to do this with only 2 or 3 lineups, but you go for that gamble pick. I mean, even if you pay up a little bit more and do like the Cole Beasley, and Cole Beasley hits one of his 8 reception, 110 yards and a touchdown type game, as you mentioned, you can feel okay about being chalky, but also still you've already differentiated yourself there.
Yeah, because the hardest part about these short slate weekends is that you're going to have to differentiate yourself somewhere. So if you get that out of the way early, then you don't, like, let's say you try to play the chalk and like you go through and you have DeAndre Hopkins, let's say he's the second highest owned receiver. You use Devin Singletary, and shockingly enough, he and Josh Allen together is super chalky. They're not going to be, but just as this example. You then need to figure out a way in the later games to late swap onto one of these sleeper picks somewhere, and then you have to hope that they hit. If you know out of the gate either they've hit or they haven't hit, you still have time to readjust your lineups going into the games later on that, hey, I'm behind, my sleeper pick didn't hit. Now I can't use this chalky guy in my lineup because if he hits for everybody, and that's doing me no good. So at least anytime you can utilize the late swap, especially on a shorter slate like this, it does give you a bit of advantage, not like significant, maybe a 1 or 2% chance against the field, maybe up to 5% because so few people do it, but it allows you to tinker with your lineup knowing a better idea of what people have played and the scenarios that you need in order for your team to win or highly cash as opposed to the field. Like if your sleepers don't hit or your chalk doesn't hit in the early part of the games and you have Michael Thomas in, the first thing you need to do is go take Michael Thomas out of your lineup because him hitting does you absolutely no good. You're going to remain where you are. But if he like somewhat busts and you go on to, let's say, Tyler Lockett, because of him, even if you leave a bunch of salary cap on the table, he hits, Thomas doesn't, then you have a huge score against the field and you may have a chance to get your money back.
Yep. I really have nothing to add to that. That's, you added everything that I could think of when it comes to, you know what, there is one little thing I can add. It's all great and it's a great point and it's very good strategy, sound advice. Just make sure if you're doing that, don't put the guy that you are gambling on for the first game or even the second game on Saturday. Don't put him in your flex, please. This is like regular season stuff here. Don't play a Thursday night guy in your flex. Don't put, so like, just don't do it unless you're stacking in on some flex. I don't know why you would do this, but if you have all Houston and Tennessee wide receivers or something like that, but don't put them in your flex. Don't do it.
Yeah, if you have the opportunity to put anyone from the Philly Seahawks game into your flex, put them into your flex and give yourself the most outs as possible, and you can leave it till the latest possible moment to jump on.
100%. Unless, I do have one price player I really like in that game, and if he's in your flex, it's not going to matter because there's nobody else in his price range.
All right, fair enough then. So at receiver, like I constructed lineups around Michael Thomas and Tyler Lockett. One of the things that it was actually Paul Shaughnessy who pointed this out to me towards the end of the season is that the Eagles really struggle with super fast and athletic receivers. They can actually shut down good receivers. Like their pass defense is not as bad as it's been all year, but you have a guy whose athleticism and like spark score is off the charts and they just don't know what to do. Now, most people think that's DK Metcalf, which it probably is as well, which is why a Wilson, Lockett, Hollister, DK Metcalf onslaught might end up being the play. But I just like Lockett because I think that very few people are going to use him.
I'm with you on the fact that I think very few people are going to use him. I'm kind of looking right now, but I was just kind of seeing for him. But no, so to your point, that's actually, we'll jump right into that. I thought we were going to save it for a little bit. My super cheap price player is actually David Moore in this game.
Not Malik Turner?
No, not Malik Turner. For what we're talking about here, Malik Turner, I actually think, isn't he banged up and out of this game?
I don't know if he was out or if he was going to play or not, but David Moore ended up playing over 70% of the snaps against the Niners. But do you think that was a game flow situation where they were behind by so much that they just threw him onto the field a bunch?
No, and that's the thing is, I think it comes down to he's their number 3 wide receiver, and it doesn't no Malik Turner, he's their number 3 this week. And the reason I say number 3, and go back to what you're saying, we sidebarred a little bit, but you're talking about the speed. The dude runs a 4.4. He's 6'0", runs a 4.4. So I think that if you're looking for, because look, he's 3,400 for a reason. Here's their number 3 wide receiver, which might be their number 4 option, but everything you're talking about, the speed, the opportunity as their number 3. If the Eagles try to double cover Tyler Lockett or maybe try to, keep the overtop on DK Metcalf so he doesn't get behind their corners, maybe David Moore is the one that sneaks it. Obviously, David Moore paying off at this is just going to be like 3 receptions for 90 yards. And if he hits for a touchdown, you're golden. But it's still, that's why I said this.
You need him to end up scoring the touchdown. I like that, though, because I was trying to find the receiver to pay down for my salary cap relief, and the lowest I could kind of figure out was Traquan Smith at $4,000. I didn't even really love that. Although I do have a guy at the bottom of the $4,000 range that I'm probably going to play in every lineup. So we'll see how that works out.
I like the Traquan Smith one as well. It always might be a Ted Ginn situation. The one that intrigued me, we didn't even talk about him, but Corey Davis. I know, look, Corey Davis is exactly Corey Davis. Real life. I mean, he's heading down a Devontae Parker path. Maybe in 2 years we're going to be talking about this guy being amazing. he did pop off at the end of the year. And I'm just saying, it is the Patriots. If Stephon Gilmore rebounds, if this game pushes a little bit of pace here, look, I don't want to do it. I've been as disgusted as you have been for what we've seen from him. But I mean, we're picking opportunities down here. And if you're looking at opportunities, I'm looking at it. If it's Traquan Smith, I think I know the other guy you're talking about here, but it's Corey Davis. I mean, like Tajay Sharp. I guess maybe Tajay Sharp, the middle of the field before last week. That's actually been the Ravens and the Patriots were very similar in this facet, is that over the middle of the field, those slot guys, the quick underneath guys, had shown a little bit of opportunity over this. So maybe it's Tajay Sharp. Either one of them, they're both 3,800.
Yeah, I think that if I was going to go to a receiving piece of the Titans game, it might just be Jonnu Smith.
I like Jonnu Smith a lot, actually.
So the guy that I wanted to bring up, I don't know what to do with, and this isn't the guy that I was locking into all the lineups, but Robert Davis actually played more snaps than Greg Ward against the Giants in Week 17. He only had 2 targets. He had no catches, but he was just always on the field. He's $3,200. Do you think you could sneak him into a lineup just as a pure flyer?
It would be this would be 1 out of 20. Just a pure flyer. I just don't know that I trust much of anything. And look, for everybody out there, there's going to be a lot of people, I'll say this, but plugging in Greg Ward, I don't love Greg Ward because I don't love Greg Ward with the ownership. You know, a few weeks ago on the DFS show that we were doing, I liked Greg Ward at the time, but as you just mentioned, the snaps weren't there. And then Greg Ward is kind of Cole Beasley. Like, what's the ceiling? And if that many people are going to be on him, kind of like you're saying before about the Michael Thomas, is like, if that many people are on him, even if he hits at 14, 16 points, you're not really doing anything that affects you. Like, you might as well just throw that out. Like, you didn't do anything. You didn't make up any ground because he's probably going to have a high ownership and you didn't pull anything away. Like, I would just avoid Greg Ward, in my opinion. I would just steer clear.
Dante Burnett was the other one. Like, JJ Arcega-Whiteside basically did nothing for the Eagles, but Burnett. He is nothing. Burnett only played 20% of the snaps, but he actually did stuff in the receiving game, as opposed to Robert Davis, who was just always on the field yet did nothing. Like, I don't know. Like, I would be lying to you if I told you I knew like a ton about Robert Davis and Deontay Burnett. But this is where we're at with the Eagles. If Aguilar ends up sitting again, which it looks like he's going to do, like, would you have a preference between the two? Like, I'd probably just take the guy who's always on the field, but it seems to be one of these situations where when Burnett plays, they actually try to get him the ball.
Yeah, but I would go for what's on the field, but that doesn't always mean anything. I can't. That's been bothering me since you brought him up because I've been trying to think of it. There's a wide receiver that had been on the field. Oh no, was it tight end? Maybe, I don't know. Whoever it was, there's somebody who talked about a few weeks. No, this was a more relevant name. Somebody who just is on the field that much and just essentially not used. And no, it's not AJ Howard. But since we are kind of starting to skim into tight ends here, that's why I don't even care that it's chalky. I have Dallas Goedert. I Dallas Goedert everywhere. It's either him or Jonnu Smith, and I have a couple lineups that I'm doing the 2 tight end thing.
Yeah, the 2 tight end thing is a good way to get away from ownership, and it's just cheaper in general if you do want to do that. And you can put Goddard into your flex if you end up going with that method. And then I know
that's what I have.
I mean, I know he's going to be semi-popular, so if you're behind, you can swap off to him onto maybe one of these losers and hope that they hit Goddard or Perkins, whoever it might be. What's the deal with Zach Ertz? Like, are we convinced?
What's the deal?
What's the deal with Zach Ertz? Yeah.
The fact is, I think he's going to try to play.
He practiced today.
Was it full though, or is it one of those he was on the sidelines and ran some routes? And what kind of session was it? Do we ever report on that?
Well, it just says, and we're recording this on a Thursday, so the Thursday practice report just says Zach Ertz ribs practiced again Thursday. That's it.
Still feeling, yeah. I'm looking right now and seeing that the Twitter from Dave Zangaro. I don't know how much, but this one to go back to. So I'm not using Zach Ertz much, but if he plays, this is the kind of the argument for before of like the Dalvin Cook situation. You might want to pay up for him that you're definitely going to differentiate your lineup there because everybody's paying down for Jonnu. Everybody's going to be paying down for Dallas Goedert, even if Ertz is out there because Goddard's been a great play, even with him out there. And everybody's going to be looking everywhere else except for Zach Ertz because of the price and because of the injury concern. If he does the Dalvin Cook, I mean, you're looking at the aces there. And the only problem I have with that is that I feel like he might be a pivot for what everything you've just talked about is that, if you have heading into this game, Tyler Lockett, and you're behind, a lot of people might move to Zach Ertz for that same reason. So you might get a lot of movement late to Zach Ertz.
Well, I'm not really too concerned about that, only because so few people actually utilize the late swap that.
No, that's
fine.
true.
So I would still, if we don't know, like, especially if we don't know going into Saturday, most people are just going to set their lineups and just not think about it until they go to look to see if they won or not. So with Lockett, yes, you could pivot down to Zach Ertz if he's active, if you wanted to, but I don't think that Lockett's going to be super chalky. The one thing that you can do with Ertz, if you plug him in, because he's expensive, he's $6,000. So if you put him into your flex, not necessarily your tight end, or even if you want to do it into your tight end, and he is ruled out, or there's just some sort of bad vibes around him, he's going to play limited snaps, whatever, and you don't want to use him anymore, instead of using that $6,000 and going on to Goddard, if you have it at tight end, just go on to Perkins. Just because Goddard's going to be super chalky, super popular. And if you do need to differentiate, let's say you're up by a bunch, then you can just easily go on to Goddard. It's not that big of a deal. But if you do need to catch up, just bite the bullet, sacrifice the money, and go to $2,900 and use Perkins. Like, he's going to be viable if Zach Ertz doesn't play, and then you just have to hope that he has a better game than Goddard, which he just did.
And there's a lot to play with in this game. Everything you just said. I mean, there's a way where you could look at it. You might pivot to Metcalf and Perkins, or vice versa, David Moore and Dallas Goedert. I mean, there's a lot of flexibility you could create for yourself heading into this game. Hell, if you want to wait this long for a running back option, and then you do go for the Marshawn Lynch, and just hopefully that you're just celebrating with him. I think there's a lot of flexibility to do what you're talking about. And I was trying to give your viewer, like, they're paying attention to you, Pat. They're listening to us. Your viewers are smarter than you give them credit for.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But, like, I wouldn't be concerned about ownership based on that, just because I know most people aren't going to do it.
Yeah, well, definitely. By the way, the team name for next year, Bad Juju Smith-Schuster, because it's true.
Hey, he might get it all back if Ben's back next year.
I don't know, but I think that's going to be my team name for my league next year. You just made me think of that.
Yeah, so Vikings guys at receivers, Diggs and Thielen. No one's going to use them. No one wants them, but they're going to be playing catch-up this entire game, presumably.
They are, but I think that it was the Week 16 show. They talked about it, and I said everybody overlooked the pickup of Janoris Jenkins, and everybody, just nobody was making noise about it. Don't know how many snaps they're going to play, even if it's so. That people also didn't give credit to Jenkins for what he had been doing since the beginning of the season, like Lattimore around week 3 or 4. They both changed course and played great ball, not quite to Lattimore's level, but had been inside. I think he was inside the top 10, if not the top 15 in Pro Football Focus's grades since that time. And what did we just see last week? Eli Apple was dead freaking not even active. So I look at this now, and it's not just even playing catch up. I just think this secondary and this defense is scary. And I think, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, I think the defense is going to be one of the most highly owned defenses, even at the price, because of all that. But I don't know. I just don't know how much Kirk Cousins is going to be able to do. Adam Thielen still doesn't look 100%. He doesn't look like he's, back to the Thielen we knew before the injury. He almost kind of looks like Julian Edelman, like he's really fighting through it. Stephon Diggs would be the one I went to, if anything. And I know you could say, well, Thielen would be the play because nobody wants him because he's banged up. But if anybody's going to do something against this defense, and I'm not even talking about the busted play from last year, but his speed and quickness, if there is pressure. But what did we talk about before, too, earlier this year with Kirk Cousins? If you're looking for the Diggs game, you're looking for somebody who can pressure the quarterback and make Kirk Cousins think quickly. Well, if he's thinking quickly throughout this game, we could see Diggs fall into 10 targets.
Is John Brown a better play than almost like 98% of the other receivers? Like, if you just started your team with Michael Thomas and John Brown, I feel like he'd be doing pretty good.
I kind of feel like I didn't want to bring him up. I have like 90% ownership on John Brown.
Yeah, like, he's in a great spot.
He is. And at 6,000, for John Brown, he's mispriced.
Would you, if it came down to it, would you rather play Singletary at 6,000 or John Brown at 6,000? Because for me, it'd be John Brown.
Yeah, I agree with you. It'd be John Brown because he's 90% and Singletary's not.
Yeah, but it's funny. Like, there's a big gap in the pricing here. Like, you get to those guys, then all of a sudden there's like a cliff. It goes to Cole Beasley. He's $5,600, who I don't hate, by the way. I like Cole Beasley. Then it's like Greg Ward at 52. We know he's going to be popular. Then it's into like Fuller and Stills and Traquan and Mohamed Sanu, and the guy that I'm playing in 100% of my lineups, N'Keal Harry at 4,100.
I thought you were just going to skip over him.
No, he is going to obliterate the Titans here, because the Titans, shockingly good against slot receivers, real bad on the outside.
They are real bad on the outside. So watch it be a Philip Dorsett game.
You know what? That's actually not. Maybe I shouldn't do 100% N'Keal Harry. Maybe I should move on to a little bit of Philip Dorsett. I just think that Harry
3,200.
They're starting to use him on reverses. Like the Brady game stack is just one that no one is going to use. He's the cheap. Like that's such a cheap stack. Like if you want to go Brady, Dorsett, and Harry, you could basically have all of the rest of the good players at the other positions.
It could. I mean, that combined trio right there would probably give you like a 0.5% overlap. The interesting one from this group that I want to ask you, because I campaigned to have you put him in worst place a bunch of times. And I even sent out a tweet at the end of the season because I think it was Anthony Staggs who tweeted out, Will Fuller finished? And I said, yeah, but let's talk about the fact 2 games accounted for like 68% of his production this year. And that's why I will never, ever, ever touch Will Fuller in seasonal, period. Yeah, I mean, if people want to roll him out there, Joe Holcomb was trying to make a case for him every week. And I was like, okay, it paid off 2 out of 16 games.
Yeah, but
good for you.
Hold on. No, that's good. That is good. That is the case to play him because people are pensive like you are because the donut is out there.
That's my problem.
On a slate like this, I mean, you have to risk having the 0. He's a game time decision, so no one's really going to be using him. But if he's active against the Bills and he has this, I mean, he's the perfect type of GPP play. He really is.
He is, except he's not. I don't want to make that bet because I don't know for sure. I don't know how people act in the playoffs. But if this is a regular season game, even with this questionable tag, my problem with Will Fuller is that his ownership is still always too high because everybody always just expects that 2 touchdown, 3 touchdown game that everybody sees the price. And look, right now, that price is $4,900 with the questionable tag on top of it. I don't think you're still going to get people pulled to him. And then if he is active, come tomorrow being Friday, and people are like, oh, well, he'll be fine. The people are going to flock to him because it's $4,900. He can hit 5 times value in a blink of an eye. And that's why everybody always owns him.
Agreed. But he's not going to be owned to the extent that you think he is. Like, even if he's 15%,
I'm
that's
interested.
too low on this slate. So
that's what I was going to say. I was going to say if he practices on Friday, I would think his ownership projection jumps over 20%. I might be wrong. Again, I don't know. I don't play playoffs as much as regular season. If regular season, I would make a bet on his ownership, but obviously it wouldn't be 20% because it's a full slate of games. But I kind of feel like it would be at least 20-25% if he's off the injury report tomorrow.
So you finished inside the top 10 at Fantasy Pros in best ranking accuracy again this year. So congratulations to that, Jake. So let's rank these guys in. Let's throw price out the window, and we'll start with all the receivers from N'Keal Harry down. He's $4,100 down to the $3,000 guys. He would be number 1 for me if you can get him in. I'm going to make a point to get N'Keal Harry in. Who would be number 2 after that if you were just straight up ranking it? Would it be David Moore or would it be like Traquan?
I think for me, I would go with Traquan because at least he could be the number 2 wide receiver. David Moore is still going to be the number 3, best case scenario. Like it could pay off, but it could pay off and the opportunities are always going to funnel down to him third. With Traquan, there's games where all of a sudden he turns into the number 2 option. Granted, number 2 is relative with the Saints, but that's why, by the way, you gloss past the fact, I even called you out on Twitter for it in a good way. We combined, and I say we, because your knowledge and mine combined for the forces of the powers that may be, or whatever that show, I forget the beginning. The forces combined, the Voltron. We Voltroned to the number 1 defensive ranking.
Congratulations. We deserve a Barry Horowitz back pat for that one.
Hey, that's a difficult position to project.
It's funny, like I'm so bad at rankings and projections that the one that's the most volatile is the only one that I'm good at.
So I should have used your rankings for tight ends.
Yeah, what happened to you with tight ends?
And so I said this, and I'm not making an excuse.
You're definitely making it.
It was not a good year for tight ends for me. I think it was 92nd or whatever. But I did tweet this out. The difference between the 100th ranked person at tight end and 10th was the same gap as the person from 40th to 10th at wide receiver, to give you an idea. So I could hit the top 5 every single week. It was just always guessing Noah Fant and Mike Gesicki and always getting those guys wrong.
Yeah, I mean, my tight end rankings barely changed at all throughout the course of the season. Like
that might have been the smart way to do it.
It was like, here are the 6 guys that are good. I don't care what their matchup is. They're just the top 6 every single week. Put them in whatever fucking order you want. And then who might score a touch? Who's like getting an increase in target share throughout the course of the game? And then if anyone's playing Arizona, just rank them number 7.
No, so that doesn't always work for what you just said. You said rank them however you want. You should have just kept them in the same 5, because I did that the one week that George Kittle was like questionable and in the late game. So I was like, look, I'm going to rank him behind the big 4 because I would play the big 4 instead of waiting and not knowing what his usage is going to be. So I ranked him at 5, and that was the week that he went ballistic and finished like number 1. And again, that gap was like 30 points or 25 points or something. So I got smashed that one week just in that alone.
All right, let's talk about tight ends before we start talking about quarterbacks, because you probably do want to end up you're going to stack whoever with whoever. Ertz is the most expensive. He's $6,000. We're not sure if he's going to play or not. Goddard is second at $5,200. And obviously, if Ertz doesn't play, everyone's going to use him. Then you have Cook at 49, Hollister at 43, Jonnu Smith at 38. Those are probably the good guys to use. I don't want to say safe as it pertains to tight ends, but that's probably as safe as you're going to get. Then it's Kyle Rudolph, Josh Hill, Darren Fells, Josh Perkins, and Dawson Knox at $2,900. Honestly, like, just pick 1 or 2. Like, that's the move here at tight end this week because there are so few decent options. If you were going to pay down, who would it be? Because I'm thinking it's probably Darren Fells for me.
There you go. So we have nobody else to talk about because that was going to be the only one I brought up. I was like, that's the only person.
Maybe Dawson Knox. Like, when we looked at the list of all the dudes that the Bills sat against the Jets, he was actually one of them.
Right. And that's why, but at the same time, it's the Josh Allen factor. When we factor in Cole Beasley, we have the Josh Allen factor, and then we have the Josh Allen factor of it's Dawson Knox maybe seeing 5 targets. So again, it's $100 difference. I'm not sweating $100 difference for the fact of if I'm going to go down here, I'm just going to go straight to Fells.
And if I had my way, I'd probably use Hollister or Jonnu Smith, depending. Like, there's a $600 gap, $500 gap between them. Hollister is 43 and Jonnu is 38. Like, just use one of those 2 guys if you're not going to use one of the Eagles.
My concern about Hollister was the late in the season usage. It just, he had that run in the middle of the road where all of a sudden I was like, oh, it's the Seahawks tight end all over a sudden. And then they just stopped going to him. And I don't know if that changes this week. So I hate that. God, I can't, 4,900 for he who shall not be named on this show. I think is actually a really good play.
I dare you to use Jared Cook. I dare you. No. Watch how well that turns out.
Hey, he had been double digits in almost every single game since I talked about this on, we did the rankings for the playoffs, like the more standard format, like drafter teams and stuff like that, and broke down tiers and how my rankings, because I rank for this playoffs and I say, I gave you tiers on top of it because if you disagree with my picks and the Saints going to the Super Bowl, you're going to have a different set of rankings. So I gave you tiers as well. And he was my number 1 tight end because 4 games of him, you can't go away from it.
You could just use Dawson Knox because clearly the Bills are going to win the Super Bowl.
No, how great would that be if like Tannehill and the Titans made it?
It'd be kind of interesting, but like, there's also no floor for Jonnu Smith either. He appears to either have a good game or a horrendous game.
Yeah, he just gets, it's so weird too. And you know what? Before I said I love him, but the only thing that brought me hesitation was Bill Belichick calling him the most talented tight end in the league. And that I think he, well, so that's the thing. Like, look, I don't think Belichick's like lying. Like, I think he actually might believe that he's at least top 5, if not top 3. If not, he's being 100% honest. My concern is that he's honest. And what do Patriots always do? They take away the best player. Well, if you're also taking away, AJ Brown, and you're just like, fine, we'll take away Jonnu too, and go ahead and try to give Derrick Henry the ball 30 times because we'll still put up more points in the time that you're able to do that because it's going to take you forever to get down the field.
Quarterbacks. Drew Brees, play him.
Yes. The only difference, so I have Drew Brees a ton, and probably I'm looking right now, probably like the 80-90% range. I'll tell you the 2 that I'm thinking about. It would be Russell Wilson if you're going to go for that stack, and my stack would be not Lockett. Well, the Lockett, what we talked about before, the Lockett with DK Metcalf, if you're trying to go for the pay up one, because I think the price is going to be prohibitive for that. But if you want to differentiate a little bit and take one of them with Russell Wilson with the David Moore, I think that's interesting. And then to stay in the same game, because it would give you some flexibility, what you've been talking about this entire show with having to do late swap and everything like that. I think Carson Wentz, because he's throwing to nobody, is going to be somebody that if you look at the last 4 games, very productive fantasy wise. But the problem is you just pair him with Dallas Goedert, question mark somebody else. And that would be why, only because it'd be risky. But I'm kind of with you. I'm with like the Drew Brees or maybe the Tom Brady situation you talked about. I don't like really much else.
So if you look at overall implied team totals for the week, the Saints are clearly number 1. They're implied for 29 points against the Vikings. Who do you think the number 2 projected team in points is this week?
So there, I'd say Eagles.
It's the Patriots.
Really?
Yeah. So back to what I was saying before, that it's not a high percentage chance of happening, but I do think there's some viability to Brady, Dorsett, Harry, bring it back with Derrick Henry, and hope that's the game flow. No one's using it, and like a lot of the stuff is going to be a crapshoot. So, they are projected for the second most points on the slate. Now the defense probably ends up doing the scoring, but it's just funny to think of it in that way, that everyone's kind of off this Patriots offense. It's not very good. We all kind of recognize that, and it's hard to predict where the points are going to come from. But that's also going to lead to almost no ownership. That if that, like I'm saying, like if you play in the Pat Mayo Experience Open, you can enter 3 teams. I might just do that Patriot stack for one of my teams and see what happens.
Yeah, I'm looking at it, and my real answer would have been the Seahawks, but the way that you asked it, I felt like that it was going to be a non-obvious one, and it is still non-obvious. I like everything you just talked about, and I wanted to come back and say, you know what? I talked about before with Hopkins, I kind of like Deshaun Watson, as in the fact that everybody's like, oh, it's the Bills defense, it's Tre'Davious White, it's the Bills and slowing things down at times, and this game could surprise. If Houston does put up 30 points, I mean, if you have Watson, Hopkins, and Will Fuller or Duke Johnson, I mean, them putting up 30 points and doing that with those 3, you're going to be, as you mentioned before, you're going to be with that early lead, with a differentiated early lead. You probably can't get in Michael Thomas with that, but you could definitely go to the more chalky 6,000 and 7,000 guys.
Yeah, or even if you just wanted to play it a little bit weirder, you could do Deshaun Watson, Darren Fells, and Duke Johnson, and then bring it back with like John Brown, and then you can still pay up for all the guys that you wanted, just trying to figure out different types of stacks for some of these games. I do think, like, just objectively, if you were just to play like one of these guys on an island by themselves, which I'm not recommending that you do, and then you can kind of work your stacks out. Drew Brees is by far the best play on this slate, and he's not even the most expensive guy. But just know, probably half the people are going to own him. After that, the one I think you could go to, if you really wanted to, I talked about like the contrarian Brady stack. That would be my preferred contrarian stack of the bunch. But Cousins, Thielen, Diggs, if you want to roll that, or Cousins, Diggs, Rudolph, something like that. No one is going to use the Vikings.
Cousins, Diggs, and Big Irv.
Big Irv.
I actually think that, to your point, I mean, because it's been proven before, and you talked about the checkdowns. Cousins, Cook, Diggs would be that nobody's going to have that. And
or even just Cousins, Cook, and hey, just hopefully they get all the points.
Naked Cousins. Ooh.
Naked Cousins. Looking sexy, Naked Cousins.
There you go.
Defenses. Let's close this out. You kind of hit on it before. Everyone's going to be using the Saints. This does seem like the Patriots are only $3,400. I don't know what their ownership is going to be, but again, if they can hop out to a lead here, maybe Tannehill Pumpkins in a big spot.
And that's a certain ability to go for here. And the fact that you said only, I mean, it hasn't been the same defense it was where it was just even at 4,000, you thought about playing them. But that's the scenario you went for with the Patriots. And that's what we saw a lot of in the beginning of the year too, is they got out to leads. They forced teams to pass. They have corners and secondaries that can get the turnovers. They hit the quarterback and get the turnovers that way. And that's what you're looking for there. I would say, I'm kind of staying away from everybody except for the Saints, Patriots, and the one other one that I will throw into tournaments because he's turnover prone by himself and still can put up points. So it can work both ways, is the Houston Texans defense. Not a great defense, But it's Josh Allen, and Josh Allen for himself, it's almost not quite Jameis Winston, but it's kind of that factor where, you know what? Oh, so what? They put up 27 points against us. He still turned the ball over 4 times.
Yeah, he's one of these quarterbacks better. I mean, he's been very good at protecting the ball lately. That is the one thing in the second half of the season that Josh Allen actually really did improve, just not giving teams short fields like he did early in the year. So that is concerning. But if Watt is back, and you can't bank on Watt being 100% because he's probably not going to be. But if he has an impact on this game, then all of a sudden the Texans are probably the best value on the board. It's funny, looking at it right now, an adjusted sack rate of all the teams left in the playoffs per sacks per drop back against, which team do you think has the highest percentage of sacks?
Houston? After you just said all that?
It's not. It's Minnesota.
I know. It's Minnesota. So there you go.
So you could use Minnesota against the Saints if you want to. You just
no,
you don't want to. But after that, it's Minnesota is 5th in overall adjusted sack rate. The tops of the teams playing this weekend: New England, New Orleans, Buffalo, Tennessee. Tennessee's D, is that interesting to you whatsoever?
I think it's interesting only for the fact of what you're talking about. But the problem is it's getting the turnovers. And I just don't know how many, even with this way this team there's so many reasons, and it's all narrative, and it's all knowing what we know about this team. There's nothing on paper, but just I don't see a ton of turnover opportunities here. I think if I could name my DFS team, I would turn down or pay down for Watt.
Eagles against Seahawks, just knowing that the offensive line is so banged up. So So Patriots, Saints.
No, if I'm going to go on that one, I would go Seahawks against the Eagles.
Really?
Yeah, because you talk about isn't Lane Johnson out?
Lane Johnson returned to practice today, it seems. Let's see here. Where is it? Lane Johnson. Yes, Lane Johnson also practiced along with Zach Ertz, so he might be back. But the Seahawks just don't generate pressure. They're 3rd worst in the league in adjusted sack rate.
I know.
They don't get sacks, and if they don't get pressure, I don't want them.
No, they don't. But it would come down to no Lane Johnson. And so that it would it's crazy that I'm talking about like a freaking tackle in that, but let's give credit where credit's due. I think if you take them out, I'm not saying all of a sudden they're going to be it's a pressured team in the league, but you take him out, it's a significant factor. The receivers that Carson. So basically no Lane Johnson, no Zach Ertz. I'd think about the Seahawks in the spot or two.
All right. So for me, it would be Patriots, Saints, probably the Saints, depending on how many other Saints that I had in my lineup, or potentially Vikings, and then pay down for the Texans or Titans if I was going to go that route.
That's the same thing I would do, but I'm not as sold as you are on the Titans. I think mine are the Patriots and the Saints, or pay down for the Texans, and that's about it for me.
Yeah, I think the Texans are objectively a better play than the Titans. Just I know people aren't going to use the Titans. So depending on how my lineups work, like if I do that Brady build, then I'm probably not going to use the Titans defense. But if I have a build where, let's say, I have Cook in it, or I have Diggs in it, or some of the Titans, then using the Texans would make a lot more sense for me, kind of thing.
Well, yeah, if you're gonna find a Derrick Henry lineup and put the Titans together with it, that'd be a great move.
Yeah, and that's a spot where obviously you wouldn't use the Patriots defense, presumably.
Right.
But there's going to be you can tell yourself as many stories and how the games are going to work out. One, you're going to be wrong. So there's that. But two, it's such a small slate that you're going to have crossover against your defense likely somewhere.
Yeah, and that's understandable. I'm looking right now, and although if you, not necessarily, if you have the Saints, I think that's the one that you probably don't have crossover, because I'm looking right now and none of my Saints defensive rosters have crossover.
Okay, that's fair. All right, Jake Ciely, thank you for doing it. I can't believe we talked about a 4-game slate for over an hour. It's nice. TheAthletic.com is where you can find Jake Ciely. You can also follow him on Myriad Podcasts and at AllenKid on Twitter. Tell us about all of these podcasts and what you got coming up in the new year, because I think they're forcing you to do fantasy baseball again, aren't they?
No.
Oh!
Yeah, but I just broke some news. No fantasy baseball for me, because they're kind of going in a little different direction with the podcasting, and they don't want either a temporary baseball show, or they don't want a show that goes from baseball to football. And they also don't want a guest in from like February and then I cut out in June. So football only, everybody, twice a week. It's going to continue, although we're breaking up the show. Now it's going to be like me and Chris one day, and then me and Brad the other day, or Brad and me. And then I still have the D'Angelo Williams podcast going on for a little while longer. And then my All in Sports, I was on a little bit of hiatus for the season, but that's what happens. Easiest thing is do what you do. I tweet it all out, so just follow it there.
Yeah, you just follow on Twitter and you can get everything there. See, I like the breakup for me because football and golf, and now that golf has basically been like, you know what, we don't want to compete with the NFL whatsoever, that they wrap their season up 2 weeks before the NFL starts. Like, this is great. It's perfect.
I know, that was
perfect content schedule for me.
I remember the days where that used to drag all the way until it was late November.
No, well, they still go throughout, but it's like swing season, like no one's really paying attention. But they used to have the FedEx Cup playoffs in September, and now they've moved it to August. It might be different because of the Olympics this year, but on a regular basis, that's how it is.
Oh yeah, the Olympics are this year.
The day I gave up fantasy baseball really made me enjoy my job a lot more.
I gotta tell you, as much as I love talking, like I've already talked with some people about it on Twitter. I haven't tweeted anything out fresh by itself because I don't want to piss people off yet. But the conversations, I do enjoy talking about it. I'm actually kind of glad I don't have to do a podcast anymore. I get so tired. The problem is there's so many games and there's so many players that by May, it's like I've talked about everybody. I got nothing left to say.
Yeah, and then once you start doing like full-time football and dig into that, like you're just knowledge, because there's so many people to know and so much changes every single day that like there's no off days when you're covering baseball, and that's why I ended up giving it up, because once football would start coming in like full steam because it got earlier and earlier. And remember that like when we first started, be like, hey, we're releasing the draft kit August 1st. Yeah, that went away pretty quickly. It's like it's June 1st all of a sudden.
I know.
So you're doing football full time for these 3 months while baseball is going on. Like you just stop knowing who got called up last night, and especially now with like the 7-day DL or whatever the hell that is. Like now there's even more players coming.
Oh, they're doing away with that.
Okay, good. That's probably good news.
I think they're changing it this year where they still have it for pitchers or something weird. I don't remember. Seven's for, I don't know, who the hell cares. There's 10 too, and one of them's for concussions. I'm with you on that because I had something happen with me too. There's like somebody got demoted the night before, and I had put out a trade when it had and I missed it, and it was just like, I'm with you. It's like I can't there's enough where we're doing football, 5, 6, 7 probably relevant fantasy players per team. We'll even call it 7. So you're about 250 players. Me, you, like the people that would do what we do, we know 350, maybe even 400, like people like myself that I'm going to the combine. It's year round. That's football. Baseball, you have to know like 600-700 people. And it's just impossible when we do football as much as we do.
Yeah, like I said, the best day I had is and you've seen a lot of people because almost everyone, and fantasy baseball used to be super popular. And honestly, like the football shows I put out in March will do better than any fantasy baseball show I put out in March. So why even do fantasy baseball at this point?
But the difference is the fantasy baseball people probably have the longer attention span and more reliable to listen to and watch every show that they like, because the fantasy baseball people are like, that's why I pissed off somebody not knowing that the guy got demoted the night before. Like, oh, I'm sorry, I missed news within the last 6 hours while I was sleeping.
Yeah, and well, the big thing is too, like I think fantasy baseball skews a lot older for one thing, because it's a lot of people who just they got nothing to do or anything like that, and they can actually sit down and watch baseball, or maybe they have the attention span for it. I mean, I don't anymore. I mean, I watch golf, but golf is fun to watch on TV. It's exciting, but I like the content goes out of date so quickly. Like if I do something I would have to wake up and do a show at 5 a.m. so people could have it all day, but then by the time lineups come out, it could be completely irrelevant. Like that sucks.
I couldn't agree with you more. I do rest of the season rankings for fantasy baseball, and I was putting them out on Tuesdays last year. I might push it back to Wednesday because Monday night, Tuesday morning ended up being, because of the day off, a lot of like DLs and call ups and stuff like that. So to your point, I put out the rankings, and 8 hours later it's like, well, why did you do because something happened within the 8 hours since I published.
Yeah. So it's a bummer when you start thinking about it like that. I know Garion and Meany are doing fantasy baseball full time, I believe.
Yeah, they are. And I mean, I'm still doing my rest of the season. I'm still covering baseball. I'm just not doing podcasting. Yeah, I'm still.
I thought you were off completely.
No, just off the podcasting. I still have my rest of season rankings, and I'll be part of the draft kit.
Oh, please, Jake. You sound like me when I quit smoking. I quit for like 3 weeks. I'm like, I'll just have 1 or 2. And then I'm just back full-time smoking again.
No, I'm not doing any podcasting. I've already declined already. Somebody was like, hey, you come on and do a podcast for fantasy baseball. I was like, look, I don't even get into it until February. Like, chill the hell out.
All right. Well, Gary and Thorne, at Gary and Thorne, at Chris Meany on Twitter right now if you want to start talking some fantasy baseball. I'm not against fantasy baseball. I just don't want to do it. You can follow me at the PME, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can get into the Pat Mayo Experience DraftKings Listeners League for NFL Wild Card Weekend. Hit the description of this podcast or video. I talked about that fantasy golf stuff off the top. Highly recommend if you do want a very low risk way to dip your toes into the water of fantasy golf. The Gups Corner one and done is truly the best way to do that. Playing on DraftKings every week is way more fun, by the way. So just become a member at fantasynational.com and go check that out. And that'll do it. Oh, also follow the Fantasy Football Show on Instagram for that giant league that I talked to you about, those weird formats or something that intrigues you. Anyway, told you about the giveaways, told you about everything else, but I will say good luck on Wild Card Weekend. I'm Pat Mayo. I'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience! Experience!